Bruin Inc. is now syndicated on SeriousWriter.com. See them at SeriousWriter.com for resources, articles, videos, topical classes, and now a podcast, the Bruin Inc. Podcast, because we're syndicated on SeriousWriter.com.
All right, well, welcome back to Interbrews, the interview section of our Bruin Inc. podcast. I have a great special guest with us this week. It's Carla Hoch. Did I say the name right?
Close. It's Hoch.
Hoch.
Close. Yes.
Carla Hoch. And I met Carla, and Stephen and I met Carla at a conference called Realm Makers, and we've done a whole episode on Realm Makers about how much we love Realm Makers. So we met her there, and that's where I was introduced to her, at least. And the first year I was there was all the way out there in Reno, and she did a great session on fighting and how to make it realistic. And she went over all these different kind of things. It was like an hour thing in the evening, and it was just a great session. And she did some other sessions in St. Louis, I think, that were a little different. But people got notes, and you went over some things more on like an individual class basis, I think. But anyway, so that's where I met her, and in the process of her getting involved with writers and trying to help us look a little less pathetic with our fight scenes, then she had an opportunity to get signed with an agent, and you sold a book.
Yes, I did.
And it's a great story. So welcome, Carla.
Thank you for having me. Here. Thank you so much. First thing, writers do not look pathetic when they're writing fight scenes. I promise. Whenever I teach, sometimes I'll speak a foreign language. I'll speak Spanish. I know a little bit of Portuguese, and I'll say something, and then I'll say, raise your hand if you understand me. And I'll say it in that target language, and nobody raises their hand. And I'll say, okay, why did you not understand what I just said? And people say, well, I don't know Spanish. I don't know Portuguese. And I'm like, exactly. No one ever taught you. So you're not expected to know these things. And fighting is a peculiar knowledge. And so unless you go out and learn it, nobody expects you to know it. So it's absolutely normal and fine to not know how to do that. Yeah.
I remember when I was doing some of my own research for my own books and talking with some, people, as I talked to you before, you just consulting with people that I knew who had been in the Army or been in the Special Forces or intelligence or different things, just kind of consulting them. And they're like, please don't do this. Like they always have these these like pet peeves, right? Please, whatever you do, don't do this. Please just stop. Even if they haven't read anything that I've done, it's just, please don't do this. So, so tell people the story about how you got involved in both kind of martial arts or self-defense or whatever you want to call it, and then your connection with writing and writers.
Okay, well, I think it's about 9 years ago now, I was writing a book, and I had a fight scene in that book, and I didn't know the first thing about fighting. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to learn to throw a punch or something. I've been an athlete my whole life, but it was always running, and, I did different sports in college and all that, but I had never fought in any way. And so my kids were doing Taekwondo, and they had a self-defense class there. And I thought, well, I'll take a self-defense class or two. That's all it'll take. Because, fighting's not that hard. And I went to the first self-defense class, and it kind of freaked me out, to be quite honest. It scared me. I did not even participate in the class. And they were doing street defense stuff. So they had, dummy guns, dummy knives. It was Thunderdome, straight up. And I was like, no, I don't want any part of this. And so then the second class I went back to watch, I did get involved a little bit. So I was very hesitant. It took me a couple times. And then I went back, and everybody was gone. Apparently it was a bunch of kids that were in school and college and everything, and they all went home. And it was me and maybe one or two other people. And the coach, it was Hapkido-based self-defense. Hapkido is a Korean martial art. It's kind of, it's a lot of redirection. So whatever your opponent gives you, energy or emotion-wise, so if I'm coming forward at you, you're going to use that forward momentum to throw me or to block or whatever. And so the teacher of the class, I forget what we were doing, but he just flew at my face, and it scared the crud out of me. And I mean, I hyperventilated and everything. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I kid you not, I left class, went back to my mom van, and I cried. And I was like, I am never going back to this class. Never, never, never. And so I went back, and then I cried again. And I kept going back until it quit scaring me. And after a little while, that same teacher, he said, "We have an MMA class here. Why don't you try that?" And I was like, "I can't do MMA class." It's like, "Sure you can." I mean, I was 38. I was 38 at this point. I'm like, I'm too old for this garbage. And so I went to the MMA training class, and my partner was this big Samoan guy who actually, he's not Samoan, he's Mexican, but he looks Samoan. He's like 6'2" and, like 300 pounds. And he and I were woefully out of shape. If you've never seen me, listeners, I am like a strapping 7th grade boy. I'm a small person. And so this guy is literally 3 of me. And we were both terribly out of shape, and we would throw up and we would cry. And I'm like, I can't keep doing this. And I kept doing it. And that's kind of how it started. And I just fell in love with it. And that book that I was writing, that I ended up taking, Self-Defense, Learn How to Write a Fight Scene, I pitched it to a guy named Steve Lobby of the Steve Lobby Agency. And he ended up turning it down, but he really liked me. We got along really well. And I would see him year after year after year at different writing conferences. And I would always say, "When are you going to sign me?" He said, "When are you going to give me a book?" And we would joke about it. And he ended up being my agent for the book about fight scenes. And so it is a very full circle thing. But that Hapkido-based self-defense class led to MMA, which led to like 8 other things. And so for the past 9 years, I've just done a lot of different martial arts, and it has interwoven itself into writing. So there you go.
So how did you get into kind of consulting with writers? Like what was that kind of step?
About 5 years ago, I guess it was, I went to a Realm Makers conference, and they had a panel. This was back when it was in a college. It was really small that year. And they had a panel of different people that were well above my pay grade. I mean, they were seasoned writers. Bob Liparulo was one of them. They had a medical professional. They had a military professional. And a guy who was very involved at Realm Makers at that time, Ben Wolf. He knew me. We had met at another writers conference, and we had kept up through the years, and he knew I'd been doing martial arts, and I'd been encouraging him to get into it. And I don't know how, he's so crazy. He said, "Put Carla on the panel. She'll be our fight expert," which was hilarious. And so here you have all of these grown-ups, and then there's me on the end, so far on the end that, they took pictures, and I think like maybe a quarter of my face was in it. And people kept asking questions about hand-to-hand combat, which happened to be something that I actually knew about. And so the questions kind of kept going toward me. And so I talked to Ben about it. He's like, "You could do this. You could totally." I was like, "Do what?" I could do what? And he said, "Teach people how to do fight scenes." And so Realm Makers rolls around again the next year. And Scott and Becky Miner, the people who run Realm Makers, were very, oh my gosh, they were so nice. And they gave me a whole stage. And they said, "Can you keep people's attention for 30 minutes? And I was like, "We'll see." And I did fight demo stuff, and it went really well. And then the one you're talking about was the next year, and they put me on deck after the keynote speaker, which was Ted Decker. Ted dang Decker. And he took up 15 minutes of my time. And I got up there, and they were like, "You only got 30 minutes. And I said, "Well, okay." And so I started, and my 30 minutes was up, and I said, "Well, do y'all want me to keep going?" Everybody's like, "Yeah, keep going." And so I ended up, that hour long, or actually it was like an hour and a half class, was supposed to be 30 minutes.
It was so great.
Well, yeah, I had a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's how, and I started doing editing fight scenes too. An editorial company got in touch with me, and they said, "Hey, when writers send us books and they have fight scenes in them, could you read them?" And I was like, "Sure, I can do that." So that's kind of how it all morphed into what it is now.
Well, I don't think they filmed that one in Reno, but what made it so entertaining was your partner as well. Like you having someone who was willing to be the guinea pig for
Yes.
the things you were doing. Also made it, which was also Ben Wolf, by the way, but it also made it very entertaining, I thought. And so, yeah, we were like, we want to be here all night. Like, we just loved it. Everyone loved
fun.
it. It was so
and
fun.
You know what? People don't realize when you have an assistant like that, it has to be someone who is also trained in martial arts. Because if you just pick a random person, they don't know how to fall correctly. Mm. And it sounds crazy, but you have to know how to fall. I do judo, and I kid you not, for the first several months of judo, you are learning to fall. And it has to be someone who doesn't have an ego, somebody who is not going to resist against you, because if they resist against you, then you're both going to end up hurt, especially when you are a smaller person like me. And it has to be someone that you feel comfortable in their personal space, and they're comfortable in your personal space. And so I owe so much to Ben for that, because it's called an uke. Your partner is called your uke, which is the Japanese fancy word for dummy. I kid you not. Your uke has to be trained as well. And so he was absolutely the perfect partner for me, hands down.
So, and how did that translate into signing with Steve and then getting into the book?
Okay, well, a couple years ago, I got back from Realm Makers, and I think I reached out to Jeff Gerke, and I said, do you think anybody would want to read a blog about this? And he said, yeah, give it a shot. Why not? And so I started a blog, FightRite, FIGHTWRITE.net. And I started writing blog posts, and I'll be darned if people didn't read it. And they kept reading it, and then more people read it. And then I think the blog had been around for probably 2 years, and I think I reached out to Jeff again, and I said, you think anybody want to read a book about this? He goes, yeah, go ahead. And I wrote a preliminary kind of rundown of it, a little bit of manuscript and outline. And Jeff is a writer for Writer's Digest, and he gave me the name of one of the editors at Writer's Digest, and I sent him a little bit of the manuscript and an outline for it. And he sent it back to me, and he said that he had checked the comps, and it just wasn't right for Writer's Digest. And I said, okay. I said, thank you so much. I said, but you know what? When it's finished, can I send it back to you anyway? Just hear me out. Just let me send it back to you when it's done. And he didn't email me back. Well, I was very dubious of him saying he had checked the comps, because I checked the comps before I ever started writing, and there were none. There were a few things that were kind of similar, but there was nothing like what I was planning to do. And so I kept writing, and and I actually first pitched it to Steve Lobby. He also has a small publishing house that deals with craft books, and he turned me down. He said it was not right for his company at the time, and I completely understand that. And I was talking to some other people about it, Sean and Suzanne Kuhn. I was talking to them about maybe doing kind of an independent publishing thing with them. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to send it back to this guy at Writer's Digest. He told me no, but you know what? So what? Let's say he tells me no again. Big deal. And so I sent it back to him, and I got a kickback, an automatic response email that said he was no longer with the company. And I got a brand new email contact, and I said, ooh, this is good. And so I sent it to that new email contact, and I explained who I was, and I said I had been talking to the last editor about my book, which was not a lie. I had been talking, it wasn't. And I sent it to her, the finished manuscript, and then I turned around and called Steve Lobby, who has really, throughout the years, just really been supportive of me. And so I called him, and I told him what I did, and he laughed, and he said, you got chutzpah. And he goes, okay, just relax. It'll be about 6 weeks. And after about 6 weeks, if you don't hear back from them, then give them a call. Well, I heard back from them in 6 days.
Wow.
And I talked to them, and I tried to remain very calm. I'm jumping up and down, might have peed a little bit. And I called Steve, and I actually emailed Steve, and I said, would you be interested in representing a Writer's Digest author? And he emailed back, why, yes, I would. Give me a call. And so I signed with him, and then Writer's Digest sent me the contract, and after the contract was signed, they were talking to me on the phone about it. And I said, so you're going to publish my book? And they said, yes. I said, so it's done. You're not going to take it back. And they said, no. And I said, okay, well, I have to tell you, you actually turned my book down. And they said, we did what? And so then I told them the whole thing, and they had a good hard laugh about it. But I wanted to make sure they couldn't do a take back. It was like, time. So, but one of the things that they said was, yes, we absolutely love this book. We'd like you to add about 20,000 words, which is a lot of words. And I said, absolutely, I would love to do that. I think it's actually 25,000 words. And they said, can you add a chapter on fighting aliens? And I laughed and I said, can I write a chapter on fighting aliens? Absolutely. That's right up my alley. So that's how we got from there to now. And it has been wonderful.
And I can see where not only is it a good idea, but I agree, as someone who's been kind of in the writing community, and I have several Writer's Digest books, right? I mean, I have several craft books along the way that I picked up that I like. I've never seen anything like it. And I mean, and it's such a great, in my opinion, comprehensive kind of view of some different things. You don't go into anything probably in great detail, but you do cover a lot. You do cover a lot of different things. I can't think of anything you didn't cover that a writer would kind of have to kind of deal with. And so how much of those 20,000 words was the extra chapter on aliens? I wonder how many.
That was a really long chapter, actually. It was one of the longer chapters. I don't remember. I think it was a little over 3,000 words. But I'll tell you where I made up some of the words. I have a friend who is an attorney. And this is a little twist on the story. I had a good friend who had kind of been part of my training process, who, I can't believe I'm about to tell you this. He decided he didn't want to be a part of the book, which is fine. I respect that. But he had a lawyer contact me to get him taken out of the book. And he wanted a lawyer to draw up a formal legal letter saying, I don't want to be a part of this book. And the lawyer that he got to contact me is actually, I'm really good friends with his wife, and I'm good friends with the lawyer. And the lawyer's like, I'm not going to write up something to her. He goes, she's a friend of mine. So he called me, and he's like, what is going on? And I said, well, if you don't want to be a part of it, that's absolutely fine. And so I kept talking to him about it. And he said, now, what's it about? And I said, you know what? Would you like to write a chapter for me on the legalities of fighting? And that same guy is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's a first-degree black belt, and he actually does sumo, and he has, oh my gosh, he has a ton of experience in a lot of martial arts. Wow. And I had gone to a self-defense class he taught that's actually legalities of self-defense, like what you can do on the street. People who, you'll hear if people say, well, if I was going to break up a fight, I would just armbar the guy. Oh, really? Well, that's deadly force. You'd go to jail for that. And people don't realize that. But I asked Writer's Digest, I said, would you be interested in having a lawyer write a chapter who's also a fighter? And they said, absolutely. And so by virtue of him calling me to kind of give me sad news, it ended up being a huge blessing. Yeah. He wrote a chapter that people have mentioned, hey, we didn't know this stuff. People don't know the difference in force and deadly force, and they don't understand what the legal definition of reasonable is. So I thought that was a really good addition. So I didn't have to write like 4,000 of it. So
it was a very interesting chapter. I'll have to say, when I got to it, I wasn't really expecting it because I was kind of just reading through it. I wasn't, I wasn't trying to. I could see writers getting into the book just for certain parts, But I was just trying to read through it because I just wanted to read through it. And I wasn't really expecting a chapter, but I thought it was really cool. I thought it was a very, very neat addition. So what are some things, as you started to learn more and more, what are some things that you saw kind of common mistakes that writers do make when they write fight scenes? Movies might be a better example for some people, but like, what are some common things that you see that writers kind of get wrong?
I think, and this is something you see in movies, and I understand why it is in movies. There are some things, they add big flashy things to fight scenes because it's cool to see. And a lot of times writers add that to books because it's cool to read, but that's not how a real fight plays out. And you have to be careful when you're putting in all those cool things, because what is written isn't always what's read. And I mentioned that in the book. I mentioned about mace. I mentioned the weapon, a mace. Well, my editor came back to me and she said, I thought you meant like a can of mace. She goes, why would you hit somebody with a can of mace? And I was like, that is a fantastic point. What is written isn't always what's read. So when we write a fight scene, we have it in our head. And when we read it to ourselves, we read it knowing what the scene is. Well, then you hand that scene off to other people. And if it's someone who has no knowledge of fighting, they can't keep up with it. Now, it's a little different in the movies because even if you can't keep up with it, it looks visually cool. But when a reader can't keep up with it, you lose them. And it's just not worth losing them. Do not use technical jargon in your fight scenes. You do lose your reader. There are exceptions. And I use that in the book. The Princess Bride is a fantastic exception to that rule. And I'm talking about the book. And it's like this in the movie, too. But in the book, the duel between Inigo and Wesley as the Dread Pirate Roberts, they're having this duel. And they're talking about the different schools of, fencing and the different moves. And you have all of this jargon passed back and forth. Well, the reason is they're trying to impress each other. Oh, well, you know Capofera. Well, I know this. Well, and it makes sense. And the whole time you're reading and they're throwing around all this jargon, it talks about the dust moving underneath their feet. And so you realize, okay, there's a lot of sideways movement. There's a lot of forward movement. And actually some of the best writing advice I've gotten for a fight scene, I got from my judo coach, and who is not a writer. And he said it was basically set up the action, describe the reaction. And that's really good because, for example, in a judo throw, you go to a judo competition and you see them tussling, but the crowd doesn't go, whoa, until the body hits the mat. That reaction, that deep thud, that's what just gets a roar out of the crowd. And that's really what gets a roar out of your reader, too. Take your reader off the couch and put them at the fight. When you're watching a fight from the couch, you have a better view of that fight than the fighters, honestly, because you're getting all views, you're getting all angles, you're seeing every tiny thing. And, you think, why would anybody go to a fight when you get it? I mean, they're all the way up in the nosebleed section. You can't even see what's happening in the fight. Why would you go to the arena when you can sit on your couch? Because, man, in that arena, you feel it. There's just an energy. It just goes through the crowd. You can smell it. If you're close to the front, I wrote an article for Writer's Digest, and I said that, from the couch, you see the sweat. From the arena, you smell it. From the couch, you might see the blood, fling off, and in the crowd, it might hit your face. And so you want to get your reader off of the couch. Quit micromanaging the fight scene. Just get them in the arena. Tell them what the fight smells like. Tell them what it feels like. Tell them the sounds. So I think I think sometimes we focus on the wrong thing. It's really the reaction, and that's what people can relate to. Even if you've never been punched in the eye, you've probably been poked in the eye. So you understand that when you get poked in the eye, your head recoils and your eye waters, and then the other eye waters too. And no matter what you were doing, you can't see very well. So it's more important for you to describe that reaction after somebody's been hit in the eye than, they took a jab to the eye. What does that say? I generally, for once, I don't have a black eye. I generally keep some kind of a black eye on my face. I don't know why, but in jiu-jitsu, the way I move, I end up getting a black eye. And I mentioned to somebody, I have a black eye, and they went, oh, I said, yeah, I took a knee to the face. And they went, oh. I'm like, that's it exactly. It's not that I got the black eye. It's how it happened. That's what really gets people. And so put your reader in the arena. Take them off the couch. Give them things they can relate to. They cannot relate to an elbow to the face. But boy, they can relate to getting hit in the nose or having their head thrown back, or their eyes getting watered. So, did I answer the question?
No,
I hope I answered.
You absolutely did. I think one of the first.
Okay, good.
I think one of the first. This is a movie example. I know we're talking about writing, but they're so interconnected nowadays anyway. But I think the first movie example that I can think of, because I grew up watching a lot of kung fu movies, right? I mean, that's just, I don't know whether it was just me or, I think a lot of boys,
it's not.
Right? But the first guy that I saw that really made it interesting and put a lot of different reactions was Jackie Chan. Like Jackie Chan, I know a lot of it was to be comical, but like when someone poked him in the eye, he would like go back and go, ow, and he would like have this reaction instead of like, so many of the kung fu movies before that, like they'd get beaten to a pulp and they just stand there like, maybe they'd be bloody or whatever, but that's sort of like kind of inhuman, heroic aspect, and I know, and you talk about the adrenaline, in the book, and just sometimes you don't feel it like you think, but you would. You would react. Like there would be a reaction.
You react, absolutely.
I mean, like you get your breath knocked out of you, or you get this happen, and I think you're right. I think putting people in the middle of those kind of scenes, not simply. I think you're right. I think we lose readers with all the flashy moves or being technical with the moves or just the visual part. I think there's so many other senses that we can rely upon to bring people into the scene that we forget about. Like you're saying, the smells or the sounds or the slickness of this or something. There's all these sort of things that we could put in there. What are some examples? And I know one because we talked about it before we started recording. But what are some examples of movies or books where you've watched them and you said, or you've read it and you said, man, they got it right. Like it was cool, it was entertaining, but at the same time, like the skills and the reactions and everything just seemed to really work.
Right. Well, one of the books that I think absolutely got it right is Fight Club. If you have seen the movie, it's a very grimy, dark movie. And I'll tell you what, it's a walk in the park compared to the book. So I'm not necessarily saying, hey, go read Fight Club, because it is a dark and grimy book. But what Fight Club gets right is the fact that there's only 3 fights in Fight Club. That's it. And those 3 fights, you just feel it. You hear the smack. I mean, it's kind of making me grimace because of the tastes and stuff. So what Chuck Palahniuk, he's the author of Fight Club, what he does is he makes it a complete sensory experience. They don't get punched. They take a smack to the face. And that is the sound. That's the sound of a bare fist against the body. They take a smack to the face. John Wick. I love John Wick. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. And I actually said this to somebody this morning. John Wick is dead on correct, except where it's not.
Right, yeah.
You cannot get hit by a car 6 times and walk away. However, I will say John Wick is more likely to survive being hit by a car because he's a judoka. And if you do judo, you know how to fall. You know how to move your body so that physics takes care of you as much as it can, but it's still a car hitting you. But yes, I love John Wick, and I'm actually doing a podcast series on John Wick. He gets it right. Because even though everybody around John Wick may be doing flashy stuff, John Wick's not.
Nope.
And the things that people think are flashing, like somebody throws a punch and John Wick throws them like a judo throw, that's not flashy. That's just using physics. It's just really smart. So that one, and his knife work is fantastic. That definitely gets it right. Gosh, I'm so bad at answering this question. And people have asked me. Another book that isn't necessarily fight scenes, but it is a perfect example of violence is Lord of the Flies. That is one of my favorite books ever. And whenever I mention Lord of the Flies, if anybody has read it, and you remember how Piggy died, and you just remember the sound of that crack, and just that's what you want people to walk away with. You don't necessarily to walk away like, some cool fight scene. Man, they broke his nose and he coughed on the blood. People don't realize that when you take a good sock to the nose and your nose bleeds, it runs down your throat and you cough. And that is something when fighters are fighting, and they take a shot to the nose and their nose starts bleeding, not only does it impede their breathing because that one side of the nose is all clogged up, but it's running down their throat probably too. And that's actually what the puncher is betting on. Here's the thing. Fighting is the things that I do in a fight, I'm doing hoping that betting on the natural reaction. For example, I was sparring with somebody today in jiu-jitsu, and I did not want him to go left because he's a big cop. He's like 200 pounds, and if he went left, then I would end up going with him. And so what I did is I turned his head to the right. If his head is looking right, his body can't go left. So you have to bet on those natural responses to the body. If I punch you to your right side, you're probably going to lean left. Now, you may lean to the outside, but if you go left, well, then boom, you've been set up for another punch. If I want to access your neck with a knife and you're guarding your neck, I may go for your stomach to make you lean forward. When you lean forward, you offer your neck. So a lot of fighting is about natural responses. So I think the physical responses are something you absolutely need to look at when you're writing a fight scene. And as far as, man, the movies, John Wick, as far as books, Fight Club is dead on. And I'm so bad at answering that question. If you love Kung Fu movies, man, Ip Man is one of the best ones. I love Ip Man, yes.
The first two with Donnie Chen or whoever it was?
Yes. Oh. After that, they just get worse.
Yeah, they do. And then Mike Tyson end up in one or something.
Oh, bless him. Yes.
No, but those first two, I agree.
Fantastic. Kung Fu
movies.
Is beautiful. I love Kung Fu.
Oh, it's, definitely. And, you know, another one was kind of one of the first ones that I really felt tried to make it look realistic, and just see if your thoughts on it. But like the Jason Bourne series.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic example.
Those movies to me were the first movies that I was like, oh my God, that was brutal. Like that would be how you would really do it, right? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. It's been a long time since I've seen those movies, but you know what? I actually thought about that earlier when I was thinking about movies, but I couldn't remember specifically. I do remember the Jason Bourne movies, but you know, I saw those when I didn't know a darn thing about fighting. I really need to watch those again. But now looking back, I do remember they are dead on because he kept his motions tight.
Yes.
You do not reach out from your person to block, because when you reach out from your person, you open yourself up.
Right.
And so he kept his movements very tight. He, I don't remember about his punches. You know, really educated fighters, they're just not going to punch too much with a bare hand because you'll break the bones of your hand. So that's why, like in John Wick, you'll see him using, you know, weapons of opportunity all around him, or he does throw, or he does use an elbow, or hey, he just goes for a gun. Because you got to protect your hands. But yes, Jason Bourne, absolutely. The tighter the movements are to the body, when you block a blade, this is something I'm going to mention in my podcast, you block a blade, if you do not have a blade in return in your hand, you're going to block with the back of your arm. That's because if you catch that blade, you take a cut to the back of your arm, not the blood-rich underside.
Yeah.
So little things like that. I wish I knew more about guns. I can't speak to gun work. I'm actually going to a gun range on Monday. I grew up around guns, but golly, I haven't shot one in like 20 years. So at some point, I'll be more educated in guns and can speak to that a little bit better. But absolutely, Jason Bourne is fantastic.
Well, and a friend of mine that I told you, he does a lot of, you know, training and work with rifles and, you know, guns and stuff. And that's one of the reasons he likes John Wick, is that the gun work in there is very authentic. And it's in your book. One of the things that a gun guy has told me reading one of my books, luckily it was in a rough draft so I could fix it. He said, please don't ever say they changed out the clip. It's a magazine. And like I said, it was one of those pet peeve things where he was like, don't do it. Like he's like, writers and people do it all the time. But it's so, you know, it's just like one of those little pet peeve things that if someone who really knows something about that would totally get that you're not, you don't know, right?
Clips feed magazines and magazines feed guns.
Yeah.
A clip is actually inside that little if you don't know what we're talking about, when they shoot in movies and then they take the square thing and they slam it into the gun and then they start shooting again. That square thing, the bullets inside are lined up in a certain way so that they automatically load themselves. Okay, I say automatic. That means the energy of one bullet helps load the next bullet. Well, it's lined up inside that little case in a clip that keeps those bullets in just the right order. So that's why sometimes it's confused, because there is a clip there. It's just inside the magazine. Yeah. But yes, that is a pet peeve. Yes.
And I think one of the things that I really appreciated about your book, and I think it's really important for writers, because when we're dealing with fight scenes, we're dealing with character, we're dealing with goals, we're dealing with all of these sort of things that I know, like when you just watch kung fu movies, it's sort of normal for there to be this convoluted, like, okay, we're just going to fight for no reason, or even superhero movies, right? Like, oh, we're just going to fight for no reason. Or comic books, when I used to read all the comic books, and they, Superman and whoever meet the first time, they got to fight. I mean, that's just going to happen. Right. They got to and it's because they want to. It's cool, right? You want to see all those kind of.
That's
movies
what people are there for, right?
But I think, especially for a more modern audience, and I think especially to get writing and character right, you do a good job of going into some of the emotional aspects of fighting, like how hard it really is to kill somebody, and how really difficult it is to partake in violence, and kind of the level of stakes that it takes to get somebody, just normal people, but even trained people, to just kind of get there. And I just thought that was a really good thing. Maybe why don't you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, actually there is a book called On Killing, and then it has a subtitle with it that's very long, but it's written by S.L.A. Marshall, and he was an officer in the Pacific Theater during World War II, I believe it was, and he went around and he was interviewing different soldiers about, how often they shot, and the truth is the majority of them just weren't, because as terrifying as it is, the thought of being killed, it's as terrifying, if not more so, killing another human being. And so, you may have, and I forget, there was a skirmish where you had a bunch of American soldiers kind of lined up, and an enemy combatant went running across in front of them, and they all shot over the guy's head. Because deep down, they wanted him dead, but they wanted the next guy to do it. Mm. And even at that time, after that time, S.L.A. Marshall, he said, look, these are statistics. These people aren't killing. And they're saying, oh, that's not true. They are killing. But between World War II and what was the next war? Was it Vietnam?
Korea.
That was in the Korea and the Korean War. The bullet to kill ratio went up immensely. And that's because they started training people to kill mentally. It was little things like, if you look back at World War II documentaries where they have people practicing shootings, the targets are round. Fast forward to Korea, and those targets have a human form. And it's little things like that. You have to desensitize a person. And police officers have to do this all the time. I train with police officers, and you'll hear them say things like, well, the perp, or... and you hear it on the news, too. What you do not generally hear is the person who committed this crime. Mm-hmm. They'll say the perpetrator, the criminal, this, because sometimes you have to dehumanize a situation in order to do your job. And it is very emotionally damaging to kill someone, even if you have done it for the right reason. You're a police officer. It's in the line of duty. You killed someone and it saved 100 people. But you still took a life. And the likelihood of PTSD when you are the one who has killed someone just goes through the roof, especially if you see their face. The closer you are to the death, the more likely you are to get PTSD. Now, does it mean you're always going to get it? No. Some people just don't for whatever reason. But I have thought about it after I did all the research on PTSD and all that kind of stuff. I watch movies a little differently now. I like the show Vikings, and they have some epic battle scenes. And what you don't see is them leaving and some of those people just sitting around going, I killed 50 people today. Yeah. The blood that's all over me is somebody else's blood. And I think they do have to mentally kind of just block it out and go to a different place, but that's not normal. That's something abnormal you have to do in order to be able. We're not made to kill. That's just how it is. We do it, but it's not something that's just naturally within us. It is mentally damaging to kill another person, and that's why I think so many people use guns in the United States to do it, because you can have more of a detachment.
Yeah.
The farther away you are from it, the less of an emotional impact it can have.
Yeah, and just how close you are to the violence when it's a knife or a sword. Even like I know we don't do that as with swords as much in actual warfare anymore, but some of those older movies, when they like, the violence is so close and so real and so visceral when you're dealing kind of close combat instead of further away with weapons. I mean, with guns. Right.
Actually, one of the pros that vetted the book, a guy named Kirk McCune, look him up. You can look him up on YouTube if you're doing any edged weapon work in your manuscript. Give him a look. But he talked about how there are different theaters in the world where they are training the military more in edged weapons, more in blades, because that's what the people are using there. And I think Africa was one of the places where they were really stepping up edge weapons training. But these are places where bullets cost money. People don't think about that. There is one place in the book where I talk about the most expensive fight scene that was filmed, and I think it was Black Hawk Down, and bullets are expensive. People don't realize how expensive bullets are. And so parts of the world where they may not have access to the money for bullets, they're using machetes, they're using kukris. And so knowledge of edged weapons is still so important depending on what part of the world you're in. And so if you are someone who is writing a work in modern day, you really need to research where you're doing it, because it may not be a place where you have where guns are used widely, where it's going to be more edged weapens.
As I was starting to write sword battles or sword fights, right, and I would do research online, and you'd find out actually like all that flashy stuff you see in the movies hardly ever happens, if and you start to read some of that, and you say, oh, and I think you put it in the book, most fights only take 10 seconds maybe, they're so short.
They're short.
We draw them out for dramatic effect a lot of times,
of course,
but
right.
But I just think a lot of those details are great that you have in the book. So where can people find the book?
You can find Fight Right, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes at any major bookstore. I know July through September, Barnes & Noble, the larger Tier 1 Barnes & Noble, however big that is, will have it on a special display, so it should be super easy to find.
Nice.
You can also find it online. You can get it on the Holy Grail, Amazon, where you can get anything in the world. You can go to writersdigest.com and get it there. I will be at a couple conferences this summer. You can buy them at the conference. I'm bringing just a few to Realm Makers, and there will definitely be some at the Writers Digest conference in New York in August. I'll be teaching there as well.
Nice.
So just about anywhere, yeah.
Yeah. So you will be at Realm Makers again.
I will be. Yeah. I will be. I'm not teaching. I'm taking appointments, and I am one-on-one appointments, and I'm doing book signings.
Nice. What about your blog? You still doing the blog?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. FightRite, FIGHTWRITE.net. I get on there and I check it, and I'm like, who are these people? I'm very thankful at the number of hits I get. It shocks me. I would have never thought that people would be that interested. And the most hit post right now is about escaping handcuffs by dislocating your thumb. It is shocking how many I have said on my podcast. With that many people trying to figure out escaping handcuffs by dislocating a thumb, I feel like I'm responsible for something in some way. But yeah, and I try to post to it every other week or so. Right now, the last post I did was what a writer can learn about writing from John Wick. The podcast is Fight Right, FIGHTWRITE, one word. It's on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, as soon as Google approves it. And several others that I can't remember off the top of my head. But and those work hand in hand, the podcast and the blog. So the podcast, I've been doing what you can learn about fighting from John Wick, and I just did one on what you can learn about writing from John Wick. And you actually can learn stuff about writing from John Wick.
Yeah.
I promise.
Yeah, maybe not the overall plot line. It got really convoluted there in that third movie. To me, I was like,
I'm telling you. But you know what I loved about that? That's telling me there's a fourth.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, I would go see it in the theater again just to see the fight scenes. You know, like my friends and I were like, you know, but as a writer, I was like, why? What's happening now?
I'm telling you, they're laying the groundwork for another one.
No, absolutely they did. Which was a little surprising to me that at the end, you know, no spoiler alert, I guess. I guess there's a spoiler alert, but a little surprising to me that at the end of the third one, I guess there's going to be another one.
I mean, wide open. After the first one, you were like, wow, it'd be cool if there was another one. And then after the second one, you're like, oh, there's definitely maybe there's a third. And then as soon as you see the third, you're like, okay, when's the fourth?
Yeah, they're just going to keep making these.
They'd be crazy not to.
Right, yeah.
They'd be crazy not to.
They've been great. How about future books? Now that you're published, you talked about writing like some probably fiction novel earlier, right? Like, do you have any other books that you're trying to get out there?
I actually self-published a book like 10 years ago that needs some heavy editing. I've been in a couple traditionally published anthologies. Once I started doing my writing, I wrote for a magazine for years. And so anytime I would, sit down to write fiction or whatever, darn it, I'm like, I got this deadline. And then I started with the blog and then I got the book. And so I've kind of had a break and I thought, okay, I need to get back to my roots and start doing some fiction. But then I'm looking at this Fight Right book and I'm like, dang it, all the things I could have included that I didn't include. I didn't go over medieval weaponry. I did not. Oh. Yeah. And so I'm starting to look at, I didn't go over this and I didn't go over this. So I don't know. I got some decisions to be making.
You got a sequel.
I got to figure it out. I got to talk to Writer's Digest.
Think of a clever name and do a sequel and.
Oh, it would be Fight Right, Even Scrappier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Even scrappier.
It's kind of like my favorite was Save the Cat. I don't know if you ever read Save the Cat, but it's for screenplays. It's like really short, like it's about writing screenplays. And then, it was really popular. And then, of course, he wrote more. The next one is, Save the Cat Strikes Back. He's doing the whole kind of Star Wars thing. So no, it's good stuff. Well, Carla, this has been amazing, as I knew it would. And I just really encourage people to go out and search for the book. I read it over the weekend, like I said. And even for someone like myself who's done a lot of research already, because I want my fight scenes to be at least somewhat believable to people who have been in fights, and just as I really appreciated some of the more realistic fight stuff that's been happening in movies and books in the last few years. So I just really encourage everybody to get to it and look up Carla and hopefully see her at one of these conferences because they're great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carla.
Thank you for having me on the show.